stream. We're here to break down the 2020 NFL draft. Timely after Jalen Hurts winning the Super Bowl here. We'll be going over the NBA, reviewing the process that was and failed miserably, the Jimmy Butler trade, and a whole lot more with the NFL and NBA. But the Brickyard, we're back with the live stream here, going over the 2020 draft. We'll go through the first round. We'll give our picks on the worst top five picks and the top five picks in the 2020 draft. But we're here to break it all down.
We are here to break it all down. And, the 2020 NFL draft is turning out to be the draft that may just shape the quarterback generation over the next few years, where we have two significant ones, where we have one with Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, and Baker Mayfield, all of them playing a key role in the NFL script this year. And then if you look at the script this year as well, you have Jalen Hurts, Super Bowl winner. You have Joe Burrow, who's been to a Super Bowl, had maybe the best year of any quarterback, even though he didn't make the playoffs. And then you have Tua, who came back, almost led the Dolphins to a playoff appearance, but they seem completely lost without him. And then you have Justin Herbert, who's one of the most talented quarterbacks, at least in the league. If you want like consistent quarterback play, he's fine enough in the regular season.
Yeah, and then even Jordan Love later in the first round, who's been successful as the third generation Packers quarterback. So I feel like quarterback wise, it's super fascinating how everything has fallen here. But let's go over the picks, at least the top 10. First overall was Joe Burrow out of the infamous LSU team. I would say he's panned out well. Then we have the second overall pick, Chase Young, the man that was supposed to be the next Myles Garrett. He turned out to be Jadeveon Clowney. Um, the Lions selected Jeffrey Okuda with the third overall pick, and then Giants select Andrew Thomas, a tackle, which always fares well for the Giants when they pick offensive linemen
Or sign them.
or sign them. They just
Nate Solder.
offensive line just never exists. Even with Eli, just never worked. And then back to back, we had Tua with the Dolphins and Chargers with Justin Herbert, and then Derek Brown with the Panthers, Isaiah Simmons with the Cardinals, C.J. Henderson with the Jags, Cedric Willis for the Cleveland Browns, Mekhi Becton for the Jets, and ending at number 12, Henry Ruggs with the
Wow,
Raiders.
killer.
Killer. He had killer speed, some may say. And then some notable other picks in this draft that you may know: Tristan Wirfs went to the Bucks, Jerry Jeudy infamously with the Broncos, C.D. Lamb, Justin Jefferson. We had Patrick Queen, Jordan Brooks, A.J. Terrell, Javon Kinlaw as well, just to name a few from the first round. But 2020 draft, woof, a lot to unpack here.
Yeah. I can't
So much.
imagine though being Jalen Rager and somehow you find a way to be a bigger bust than Henry Ruggs. I mean, that takes extraordinary hoops to jump through there, and somehow Jalen Rager found a way to be, drafted before Brandon Ayuk, Justin Jefferson, T. Higgins, and Michael Pittman all in a row.
Yeah, and the rest of the wide receiver class too. Like the funny part about Jalen Rieger is he just recently surpassed Henry Ruggs for receiving yards in a career. It took him 4 years to pass Henry Ruggs, who has not played in the NFL since 2021, who, by the way, has been in prison for the last 3 years. So good job, Jalen Rager. The fact that you failed with the Eagles, the Vikings, who you were paired with, you literally were alongside Justin Jefferson as like the sixth receiver for the Vikings. And then you were so bad that the Patriots didn't want you back last year. And then you bummed around with the Chargers too. This guy will go down as one of the biggest wide receiver busts of all time, simply for the fact that he was right before Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, I mean, you even have in the second round star receiver Laviska Chenault taken after him.
Yes, star receiver, some may say. They also had Michael Pittman. T. Higgins was in this draft. Chase Claypool, who at one point anointed himself a top five wide receiver, to one and only Chase Claypool. I don't think anyone ever thought that he was a top five
I feel
receiver.
like Trayvon Diggs also has more catches than Jalen Rager does in the NFL.
Probably. Yeah, Jalen Rager was a complete disgrace. 86 catches for 1,000 yards over 5 seasons at this point. Last year he had 7 catches for 100 yards. Good work, Jalen Rager. And not only that, his catch percentages with the Patriots, his catch percentage was 30%. 30%. If you flipped a coin 10 times, he would catch it three. That's ridiculous.
Also, though, in this draft, like a weird thing is if you go to round three, the Las Vegas Raiders quietly had back to back wide receiver picks, and I have no idea who either of these guys are. You have in round three with pick 80, they take Lynn Bowden Jr. and then Brian Edwards.
Who
The
Brian
very
Edwards
next
now?
pick. I don't know who either of these guys are.
The funny part is Brian Edwards is already out of the league, and it's been 5 years ultimately. And then Lynn Bowden. Who the fuck is Lynn Bowden? I've never heard of this man in my life. He was
I
on the
don't think he
Saints
made the
two
team.
years ago. Yeah, he's not on a team anymore. But last time he played for the Saints. He has 39 catches for 294 for a career. Just Raiders things. Honestly, the Raiders, like, they had one of the worst drafts. You draft Henry Ruggs, who, like, for a minute was, like, fine. He was, like, just this fast receiver. I think he has the fastest 40-yard dash of all time, or one of them at least. And then they draft Damian Arnett, who was a corner, who was drafted a few picks after A.J. Terrell. This dude played 13 games. Played 13 games. And then I think he started 7 before he was gone. He played 1 season. The Raiders have not had a first round pick play 2 consecutive seasons for them since the early 2000s. That is how bad they are picking first over, like, in the first round.
We need to really pray for the safety of we need to really pray for the safety of their tight end right now. Brock Bowers may be in trouble if that's the case.
I hope that he's the exception. But if he's not, Christ almighty, they're in for some hurt. But yeah, that was an infamous pick there. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he was the 32nd overall pick. And notably after him, you had Jonathan Taylor, who was picked 9 picks later. You had DeAndre Swift, who was just a couple picks after him. You can deem whether that was a successful pick or not. Baltimore selected J.K. Dobbins later in this round, and A.J. Dillon for the Packers as well. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, of the running backs, I feel like has to be the biggest bust. And honestly, a guy who I'll always have a personal vendetta for reasons that you already know.
Yeah, I mean, you can always say that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a bust. He went to Kansas City, though, not a very run-heavy team, and I felt like he was always just a serviceable guy for them, but more of like a Shane Vereen, Stephen Ridley type running back for them, not necessarily your top-tier system guys like a Darren Sproles or a D'Angelo Williams who you could just plug into any system and they'd be good.
Yeah, they finally let him leave after his contract was up. He went to the Saints this year, and he mustered up 13 carries for the Saints to this point. So his career is probably over at this point. But maybe a team will pick him up in the offseason. Um, my observation with this draft, there's a lot of big defensive players that I wouldn't say there's like the Miles Garrett of this draft or like a TJ Watt, but there is the Alex Highsmiths. He was a linebacker taken in the 3rd round for the Steelers. They have, like I mentioned earlier, we have Patrick Queen in this draft. Good linebacking draft overall. We get names like Isaiah Simmons, Jordan Brooks, Josh Uche, Patrick Queen, Willie Gay, Logan Wilson. We got down further in the draft, Malik Harrison, Jennings. Overall, I feel like the linebacker class was something to note. And then safeties, we got Kyle Duggar, Grant Delpit, um, a number of others, Kavon Wallace, Geno Stone. Good
Yeah,
defensive
corners,
draft.
it's really just AJ Terrell.
Yeah.
Tristan Wirfs was a good pickup at tackle though for Tampa Bay. That was a good pick.
Yeah. I remember that draft. Yeah, cornerbacks. Cornerbacks. They have AJ Terrell and Trayvon Diggs, and then edge rushers. This was a definitely an underwhelming edge rusher draft. Chase Young was taken second overall. He hasn't panned out really since his rookie season. I feel like he's just kind of flamed out a little bit. And then like D tackles, we got like Matabuke from the Ravens, and then Javon Kinlaw. He's been okay for them. Edge rushers kind of lacking in this draft, I would say.
Yeah, I feel like the strongest position in this draft is wide receiver. Because in the first round alone, you have CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and he's not your favorite receiver in the world, but Jerry Judy had some really good games this year.
Boo!
And then
Boo!
we have T. Higgins and Michael Pittman as well in the next round.
Yeah,
So I feel like it's a very strong wide receiver draft, and then safeties too. You have Antoine Winfield Jr., Grant Delpit there, so like strong safeties. But yeah, like defensive end, this is one of the worst probably defensive end rushing drafts we've done from one of these. Like there's like a lot of fine names and a lot of good rotational guys I see, but no like real superstars. I feel like the only real superstars are either at linebacker, safety, wide receiver, and then you have two quarterbacks as well who became stars.
yeah. And then wide receiver draft, or I'm sorry, running back draft. This one was also pretty underwhelming. Outside of Jonathan Taylor, you don't really have any superstar running backs. Where I felt like in the last few years we had like the Jameer Gibbs and Bijan Robinsons and a number of other successful star running backs. Here, if you remove Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift has shown potential, but he hasn't really lived up to that. Cam Akers, Cam Akers fans will let you think that Cam Akers has become a superstar, but Cam Akers did not pan out the way we thought. J.K. Dobbins has been hurt. It feels like every single season he's played. And then after that, it's really like the Zach Mosses of the world who's been good, Antonio Gibson who's been fine, and then the DJ Dallases and Eno Benjamins of the world.
Don't let me get Benjamin on my team. I'll tell you what. But yeah, I do feel like the running backs, it's just like the flex guys or your number two running backs where you're like, oh, my receivers are good, but I don't know about my number two running back this season. It's kind of all those guys where if you have D Swift or Zach Moss, you're kind of holding your breath a little bit on who's going to do it. Even Jonathan Taylor, like he had that one really great year, and he had a great year this past year. But him as a number one fantasy running back, do you want him as your number one running back? Like, I guess so. Is he my first choice? No, because I feel like there's just sometimes too like long where the Colts just don't give him the ball. Like I felt like last season.
Yeah, I felt like he succeeded the most when Carson Wentz was there because they were relying on him not only in the running game but also in the passing game. And I feel like they've kind of abandoned that because the following season he gets banged up, and I feel like they're still trying to preserve and get the most out of him. But this year, it also didn't help having Anthony Richardson, who, if he had four flips of the coin, it's either going to be an incomplete pass, a bomb down the field, or him running for it, and the fourth play is him just getting hurt. So those are basically his set of outcomes that you have in any given game. The most predictable, unpredictable player in the NFL, Anthony
Mr.
Richardson is.
50%. Mr.
Hey, he's
50%.
50-50. It's not always bad to be 50-50, but for a quarterback, Mr. Black Tim Tebow, I just don't know if he fits the bill for that. But
Yeah,
we'll
and
see if Jonathan Taylor's resurrected.
the Colts like got him and Michael Pittman in the same round, like a few picks apart. They got Jonathan Taylor at pick 41, Michael Pittman at pick 34. Like in the same round. Like you had T. Higgins and Justin Jefferson who are already taken, and then you could argue that Michael Pittman is the fourth best receiver in this draft. Like CeeDee Lamb was already taken too, so I feel like you got the best player at the best position you could have if you're trying to fill wide receiver and running back for the Colts. So I feel like you kind of built your offense for the next half decade, just like the wide receiver and running back position where you have two studs there for like the next 5 years, maybe 10.
Yeah, and they've since paid both of them, um, and they've both been super successful. You look at wide receivers that were taken after Michael Pittman, that's when it really starts to trail off. And then same with Jonathan Taylor. They got him in the second round, and he was at one point the best running back in football, and at some points he is during the season. So like the fact that they got these two home run players, Michael Pittman, maybe he's not your ideal number one receiver, but he's definitely one of those guys. I think him and T Higgins. T Higgins, I think, is better, but similar in the case that if he's your two, you're pretty happy with him at number two.
Yeah, and if we take like the receivers from the second round, there's not really any studs in the third round. So say we take T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Brandon Ayuk, CeeDee Lamb, and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, like where would you rank like each of those picks as far as like if a team should have taken a receiver, or if you could have taken someone else who you would have taken?
So we're talking like the big five that we just mentioned: Justin Jefferson, C.D. Lamb, um,
Yeah.
Michael Pittman, T. Higgins. Okay. Well, I remember when the Cowboys selected C.D. Lamb, there was a lot of controversy because at the time I believe they had Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and they didn't really need wide receivers as much. So that going back to that, like obviously they made the right choice. Like he was the focal point of their offense this past year. But that one I would probably rank a little lower. The
Would you have
Cincinnati Bengals.
taken Justin Jefferson though? Like if you're the Bengals and if you're like the Cowboys, who are you drafting? Or like who do you think has the most value at that position?
If I remember correctly, the Vikings, the pick that they got for Stephon Diggs, because this is when they traded away Stephon Diggs to the Bills. So their replacement was Justin Jefferson, and that was I mean they upgraded absolutely. So
The
Vikings that
Titans saw
makes
that too and they were like, "Hey, let's
yeah,
try that."
it's a copycat league, and I feel like the poor man second was was them trading away AJ Brown. They're like, yeah, we got Traylon Burks now, we're fine, we're gonna be okay, and then it collapsed in their face, and now they are on to their new GM, and that's why they're drafting first overall. Lesson learned, guys. Don't follow the Vikings. Vikings, whether it's Chris Carter, whether it's Randy Moss, whether it's Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, they're ahead of the game with receivers. I would say the number one pick that I think that was the best of them was T Higgins, because not only did you got Joe Burrow, your guy, and then the very next pick you get T Higgins, who they're in the disputes right now. Like, are they going to pay him? Are they going to let him walk? Are they going to franchise tag him? But T Higgins has proven to be, when Jamar Chase isn't there, he's very solid number one. So I would say of all those picks, I would say the Bengals had the most justification with that pick.
Can you would you rather, if you're Dallas, like looking back at it, do you still think if they could go back in time they would take CeeDee Lamb over Justin Jefferson? Like you could still
Uh,
flip a coin and whichever receiver went to the other team would still have done the same thing.
yeah, I think they both would have. I think it's just hard for me to see Justin Jefferson with the Cowboys, but I think the Cowboys would probably be better with Justin Jefferson just because I think he's a better overall receiver. And I think CeeDee Lamb would have succeeded with the Vikings too. But I think Justin Jefferson would have been probably a little more successful with the Cowboys than CeeDee Lamb with the Vikings.
And then, so in retrospect, now San Francisco has paid Brandon Ayuk. The only one of these receivers that hasn't gotten paid yet is T. Higgins. For San Francisco, they couldn't have taken Justin Jefferson, but they could have taken T. Higgins or Michael Pittman. Do you think Brandon Ayuk in that position is kind of a bust, or would you have rather have taken him still over T. Higgins and Michael Pittman?
Yeah, no, I would have taken T. Higgins 100%. Michael Pittman and Brandon Ayuk, I feel like you'd be splitting hairs, but T. Higgins is absolutely a better receiver than Brandon Ayuk 100%. So I like the 49ers with T. Higgins compared to Brandon Ayuk, pairing him with Debo Samuel in his prime. I think the 49ers had an opportunity to potentially beat the Chiefs in that Super Bowl if they had T. Higgins. Brandon Ayuk by no means is a bad player. He's still a very solid number two, but T. Higgins is a top tier second receiver and I would say at least a mid tier number one receiver in any given team. So I would think the Niners definitely, looking back, regret not drafting T. Higgins.
Yeah, and then I feel like the Bengals and Colts, like they both did the best they could with those picks. Personally, if I'm Dallas, though, I take Justin Jefferson, and then that would drop. probably CD Lamb to San Francisco, and then who knows how it'd shuffle around from there.
I can say that. Now, here's a real question. As somebody who has posed as a Jerry Judy hater in the past, you think the Broncos would have been as disastrous with Russ if they had Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb? Keeping in mind that
Yes.
Nathaniel Hackett was their coach.
Yes. I
Yeah,
feel like
I
both of
think we
them would
could.
have assessed the situation and asked to be traded. Jerry Judy couldn't have done that. So
Yeah, no,
the Broncos had the
yeah,
perfect receiver for that time.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, Jerry Judy just dying in Denver. And then the last one is the elephant in the room, Jalen Rieger. If Justin Jefferson goes to the Eagles, obviously at that point, AJ Brown is probably not an Eagle because they missed so tremendously. At that point, like we could speculate, like where would have AJ Brown gone? Would he have stayed with the Titans? Would they have traded him to say a team like I guess the Vikings, who would have had to draft Jalen Rieger? Like what happens there? There's like a wrinkle in time there if they draft Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, the Rams trade their 2045 and 2047 first round picks for him.
Yeah, probably. Honestly, just give
And
putting
then
it
they
all
don't
in.
get Jared Forsyth. But yeah, I think he would have gotten traded to a team like the Rams, potentially the Steelers go after him.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, yeah, I think that's definitely the elephant in the room, Jalen Rieger, and then um, after that, once when we fizzle out of Michael Pittman, you start to see like some other notable names that were successful. For a minute there, we had Chase Claypool, who was successful to some extent. Gabe Davis, who had that infamous game against the Chiefs in the playoffs with the 4 touchdowns, which I feel like he's still doing well with. Um, And then there's the Darnell Mooney's of the world, who was like the top receiver for the Falcons this past year. Donovan Peoples Jones. A lot of just dudes at that point. But last person, Jawan Jennings for the 49ers. In the 7th round, they finessed and got Jawan Jennings. That's kind of insane.
Yeah. Shout out Jawan Jennings. Also, shout out Donovan Peoples Jones. He's always a receiver that pops anytime I watch him, like on Red Zone. I feel like
Yeah.
anytime I watch him play, like he does something good.
Yeah. I feel like now he's in Detroit, or at least last time I saw him, he was in Detroit. But with Cleveland, like I remember him and Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield loved Donovan Peoples Jones. You would see Jarvis Landry and Odell, and then just randomly you would just see Donovan Peoples Jones pop off your screen, and he would be the guy any given Sunday.
I mean, yeah, single coverage every play, so he always knows who's going to be open.
Yeah, he was that dude. But the 2020 draft, it'll go down as probably the most talked about draft. That with you mentioned the Lamar draft as well, because you have Jalen Hurts here as well. And Jalen Hurts, by the time he was drafted, he went to the Eagles. This was in the Carson Wentz era. Looking back, obviously that's a hit, but he was one of those prospects that was seen very raw. Obviously, he has that infamous national title game where he gets benched for Tua. His arc, he was one of the last of the good quarterbacks that were drafted. Um, but this draft, do you think this draft is kind of shaping up like the 2004 draft where we have Eli, Philip Rivers, and Big Ben? It seems like this draft has potentially 5 of those guys who could be in that conversation.
Yeah, because for me personally, I feel like Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts are both better quarterbacks than Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And not necessarily from a talent perspective. I feel like talent in the NFL can be a wash across the board, but all of them are athletic. All of them can play quarterback at the highest level in the NFL. But when it comes to like situational awareness, commanding a team, and then not panicking in the playoffs, like I feel like Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts are going to be much better over the next 5 to 10 years and have a lot more success than Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen will. So I feel like it'll be more impactful in that respect. And I think Jordan Love is going to have more playoff success than Lamar and Josh Allen as well, just because he's in the NFC. So I feel like with this draft, you're going to have 3 studs, and then let's see what Justin Herbert can do with Jim Harbaugh when he gets weapons. And then Tua is kind of a wash. He's like the odd man out in this, where he's just not as good as Justin Herbert as far as the eye test, and he'll never be as good as someone like Jordan Love, who already has a playoff win, Joe Burrow, who's already been to a Super Bowl, Josh Allen and Lamar haven't, and then Jalen Hurts has won a Super Bowl, and he's now one of three people to beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. Like, this is a guy I watched him play in college, and I don't watch too much college football, but I'm like, he can't throw. He looked like just a running quarterback. He didn't look like this, and he's
Mm,
someone who's worked so hard. Joe Burrow came into the league late. He was like 24. He was like pretty
25.
old when he came into the league. So both of them had to transfer around, find a different team. They both have a unique story here. So I feel like this is definitely shaping up to be one of the best quarterback and at least wide receiver drafts over the past decade. I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially like you have two guys who beat Mahomes, but you also have two guys like we have the Philly special now, where we're going to be talking about the tush push as an era of the NFL, especially with the Eagles winning and all these teams adapting it. They We'll see how they do the next 5 years, but this team feels like they're going to be a team of NFL history. And then the Bengals definitely have some work to do on the defensive side, but Joe Burrow is another one of those guys who's always going to be in that conversation for top five at some points in the league. I would say this year he was the best quarterback in the league statistically. So you have two guys who are going to be always fighting for that top five conversation. These other guys, like Jordan Love, I think Jordan Love is going to be excellent, especially playing in the NFC. And then Herbert and Tua have more to prove, but you have two guys who are going to be defining NFL history in real time.
Yeah, especially on either side of the conference because like the NFC, like it's open for someone to just take the reins for best quarterback and hold it for a little while now. And we haven't had a dominant franchise from the NFC in like a decade. Like, who's the
Mm.
last team? Like, the Eagles have been the most dominant franchise in the NFC. Like, in the early 2000s, like, who in the NFC was consistently making the Super Bowl? I know Philadelphia made it twice.
Yeah, Philly made it twice. Um, Not in the 2000s, but like we have the Niners who have made it a couple times because they had the Colin Kaepernick 49ers and then they had multiple Jimmy Garoppolo teams. But like
They
there's
haven't
been
won,
seven
though.
there's
Like,
been
the
seven
Steelers and
quarter
the Colts and the Patriots all won.
Yeah, that's the thing. In the AFC, there's been seven Super Bowl starting and winning quarterbacks, where in the NFC, there's been 21 starting quarterbacks. So I feel like the NFC needs that dominant. I don't think we've seen this level of dominance since like the Cowboys or the 49ers, like a team that just makes the Super Bowl consistently. Because everybody else, like Brady faced the Rams and the Panthers and the Eagles, where like I feel like in the 90s, that's when we saw like the Cowboys make it, winning consistently. We saw the Niners get four back in the 80s. Like we haven't really seen an NFC dominant, consistent team in the last few years.
Yeah, like Seattle won once, but they got back and couldn't do it. Um,
Well, I couldn't run it. That's what they couldn't
Yeah,
do.
they couldn't run it. Yeah, they couldn't
Yeah.
run it. And then the Rams made it once, lost, and then they trade for Stafford, seeming like they had to go all out and then mortgage their future. Where, I mean, Brady won multiple, Ben won multiple, Manning won multiple, like over his tenure there. So it's like the Ravens with Joe Flacco, like they were consistently good and they got to a Super Bowl and won multiple. Like the NFC really hasn't had that many dominant franchises, and Philadelphia has made three Super Bowls in the past decade and won two. Only other
Yeah.
team to do that outside of New England and Kansas City as far as winning multiple Super Bowls over the past decade.
Yeah. So I feel like this could be, if we're talking about Jalen Hurts and the Eagles' legacy, this is where they could be turning the tide away from the AFC with the Chiefs. Like Travis Kelsey's coming back this upcoming year, but he's already mulling retirement. He has maybe another year or so. Andy Reid's getting older and has had health issues. Will the Chiefs be there? And then Allen and Mahomes haven't proved it. The Bengals don't have a defense. So will we start to see more teams emerge from the AFC? And then in the NFC, will it just be the Eagles, the Packers, the Rams, and maybe the Lions if they stick around? Like teams that are going to be consistently in the mix. We don't know.
Yeah, like the NFC hasn't had that like consistent amount of franchises like in the mix here, like consistently getting the Super Bowl. So I feel like Philadelphia has a chance to finally fill that gap here, at least for a dominant franchise. And then we'll see what Washington does. But it just feels like everyone was like, "Oh, the Ravens and Bills is the Super Bowl. Now the Chiefs and Bills is the Super Bowl." And then we get to the Super Bowl, and then the Eagles absolutely front run the Chiefs and walk them all the way down and run them out of the building. So it's like you have all this talk of like the AFC so dominant. It's like finally starts. It finally feels like it's starting to shift back to the NFC.
Yeah, after what feels like pretty much like 30 years, it hasn't been a dominant NFC team. So I hope this is the era for it because with Detroit, with Philly, with Green Bay, with the Rams, like I feel like we finally have an interesting NFC. Where in the past it's just been who's going to come out of the AFC. That's the team that's going to ultimately win the Super Bowl. But it's not so much like that anymore.
Yeah, ultimately, who's going to be wrong about the draft, though? We have the Kramer of the NFL draft, Mel Kiper. What did everyone wants to know what Mel Kiper thought of the 2020 NFL draft heading into it? Do we have what his mock draft was and any of his hot takes coming into it?
Yeah, I'm going to pull those up. We have this draft for this upcoming um, draft here. Let me look at what Mel Kiper had for 2020, though. We'll go over that later. He had the Bengals drafting Chase Young.
Really?
That's the first joke. Yeah,
That's
this is
real?
mock draft. Yeah, let me look here as well. Okay, let me look at his final mock draft. He had Joe Burrow in this case. Everything kind of panned out the way he said. He had Isaiah Simmons going to the Giants, and the Dolphins selecting Justin Herbert, which I would say he won,
He
and
got
he
it
was
right.
right about. And then in this alternate reality, he had Jerry Judy going to the Jaguars. That would be kind of funny.
That makes sense for the Jaguars, to be honest.
Yeah. In this scenario, he had the 49ers trading up and selecting CeeDee Lamb in a mock draft with the Colts.
They should have done that, actually.
Yeah, that would have panned out well. In this case, they have Justin Jefferson going to the Broncos and potentially saving Russell Wilson's legacy and reputation. That's an alternate reality that I wish I could see. Oh, here we go. 19th overall, he had Jordan Love going to the Raiders.
What? Mel Kiper was
Yeah.
kind of cooking, to be honest, in this mock draft. Honestly, Justin Jefferson in a Broncos uniform, and then the Raiders drafting Jordan Love. Like, is Jordan Love even good if he plays for the Raiders? And is that still in the John Gruden area? Like, I'm
That is
gonna
the John
draft
Gruden era.
Jordan Love is gonna save my team here. Gonna bring in
Oh,
some love to this locker room. No more car wrecks. No more rugs.
and funny enough, this draft, he also correctly selected the Eagles, picking the wrong guy. It wasn't Jalen Rieger. They had Henry Ruggs going to the Eagles, which would have still fit the timeline. They would have still drafted A.J. Brown inevitably, or trade for him at least. And then they had the Vikings picking the better guy with Brandon Ayuk at 22.
Yeah, no, if Henry Ruggs went to the Philadelphia Eagles like Mel Kiper said, he definitely would have killed someone faster.
Yeah, no kidding. And then this is a this is a Mel Kiper miss only because he doesn't know how the Packers work. He had them drafting T. Higgins back in the
Oh
Aaron
no.
Rodgers era. They don't draft wide receivers in the first round. They hate their quarterback. That's not how that works.
Second round
But
receivers for Green Bay.
if they would have drafted him though, pairing him with Devontae, and then they had MVS and Adam Lazard,
Lazard.
like that would have been pretty bizarre.
Kind of cooking actually if you're Green Bay. If you took T. Higgins instead of Jordan Love.
Yeah. And then damn Mel Kiper, I think maybe we should listen to Mel Kiper more often. With the 32nd pick, they had them drafting DeAndre Swift.
Who?
Over Clyde Edwards-Helaire, that would have been better. It would have been better than although he does give him a comparison to Todd Gurley, which I think we can say now DeAndre Swift is not Todd Gurley. I think that's fair to say.
No. It was
Yeah.
Stephen Ridley, more like it.
It's just he just he's yeah, it didn't work out in his favor, I would say.
He could be
And then
great.
he could be great, but he won't be. They had J.K. Dobbins going to the Chargers. Where do they have Jonathan Taylor going? Cole Kmet still goes to the Bears in this reality. This is a reality I want to live in.
Yeah.
Chase Claypool gets drafted by the Jets, and then Jalen Hurts goes to the
Really?
Steelers.
Why does that
And
make so
this,
much sense?
it makes a lot of sense. I'm surprised he hasn't played with it. It says Robbie Anderson is gone, and Brashard Perryman and Jamison Crowder sit atop the Jets' wide receiver depth. Let's give Sam Darnold more weapons so Adam Gase can fully evaluate the third-year quarterback.
Adam Gase.
Has a high ceiling. High ceiling if he gets in the right situation. Well, he didn't get in the right system.
How is
And
that
then,
only 5 years ago for Adam Gase? It feels like it was a decade ago.
yeah, honest to God. And then the last kind of interesting piece, he has Jalen Hurts on the Steelers in this alternate reality.
Oh, that's
Could
a
you imagine?
tease. That's a
That is
tease.
such a
Where was he
tease.
taken? In the third round or second round?
He was drafted in the second round. The Eagles came and swooped him in about 10 picks earlier.
For Mel's draft.
Who? Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, when he goes to the Steelers, is it still the second round?
Yeah, still second round.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is interesting. Clyde Edwards-Helaire becomes a Ram, which makes sense. Jordan Brooks goes to the Eagles. Eagles still finding studs in the draft. Jalen Rieger, here's the funny part. This is a part, there's a couple more people to go over, but Jalen Rieger goes in the second round at the end of the second round in Mel Kiper's draft. Eagles. Listen to Mel Kiper. He knows more than you, apparently. Michael Pittman's a Dolphin in this scenario, pairing them with Justin Herbert. That's an alternate reality there. And then it just keeps going on. Trayvon Diggs, who ended up going in the fifth round. Yeah, I honestly, like, do you prefer this reality over the reality that we're in now? Because, VR is becoming very popular. Meta's releasing sunglasses, and, the quests are booming now. If we can live in an alternate reality, would we choose to live in Mel Kiper's 2020 reality or in the reality we have now?
Yeah, give me an order of that Mel Kiper strain. Like, I want whatever he's on right now because he was absolutely cooking in the NFL mock draft there. So he eventually had Joe Burrow going to the Bengals, but he started out with them taking Chase Young. And then he's like, you
Woof.
know what? We just need to build a star studded defense around AJ McCarron, and then we'll have some success, was his thought process there. But he came around, but yeah, I do like that reality where we have John Gruden and Jordan Love. We have Justin Jefferson on the Broncos. Like, I feel like he absolutely cooked in this draft. And if you're Philadelphia or New England, like, listen to Mel Kiper.
Yeah,
Just do it.
you would have
He knows how to
you would have
draft receivers better than you do, clearly.
you would have been just fine. Plus, to summarize the quarterbacks, Burrow stays with the Bengals, but then Justin Herbert's a Dolphin, Tua is a Charger, and then Jordan Love is a Raider. Jalen Hurts is a Steeler at this point. If we're looking at just Herbert in Miami and Tua in LA, Tua, I mean, let's think about how Justin Herbert played his first year. They stabbed Tyrod Taylor, and he nearly died, and that's why Justin Herbert played. We have CTE Tua Tagovailoa going to the Chargers. Would he have lived through this 5-year period?
He may have died with his medical issues, like, honestly.
Yeah. And then Justin Herbert would have paired with eventually Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill potentially. And then in this draft, they get Michael Pittman. So,
We
I
had
mean,
Tyreek Hill and Michael Pittman at least. Maybe you don't draft Jalen Waddle, but yeah.
yeah, Dolphins would have been interesting if they did that. But they have Tua, and he's solid. He's fine.
Where did he have Jonathan Taylor going again?
I don't even see Jonathan Taylor in this draft. I don't know where he put him. He doesn't even get drafted in this draft. This is just the first two rounds.
Huh.
Oh, you know what? No, Jonathan Taylor goes to the Bucks with Brady in this area.
Oh,
Yeah, that actually
now
I'm
he's
gonna
cooking.
actually say that yeah, this is actually pretty fantastic. I would say that I would buy into the 2020 Mel Kiper draft at this point. We should
That
make
would have
this
been
a
a
regular
crazy way to
feature.
start the decade too, because this draft, like, The thing about it is it's setting the tone for an entire decade here, like the 2020 draft. Like this is gonna shape like the entire next 10 years of the NFL, and it has with the wide receivers and the quarterbacks in this draft. But like Mel was absolutely cooking with those quarterback draft picks.
Yeah, he did. And then honestly, Jonathan Taylor to the Bucks. That's actually kind of nuts. I would live in this reality. This is a good reality to live in. But unfortunately, we live in this current reality that we are faced with now. And unfortunately, some of these teams did not listen to Mel Kiper. They didn't listen to us, who are often right. Some of these teams were just flat out terrible. Bottom line, worthy of a potentially worst top five and top five selections on the Brickyard's well known, document clearing, solidified worst top five and top five top picks of the 2020 draft. Should we dive into that?
Yeah, we should dive into the five worst picks here. Get the bad out of the way, get the worst picks, and then we'll go over who the top five picks in the draft were, going off base of weight on when they were taken and overall how they pan out versus other players at the positions when they were drafted after them.
Okay, so the worst top five picks, these are exclusive to the first round. I didn't include picks from the second and third because this is when we start guessing. Honorable mention to the Tua and Herbert picks because on one end, the Chargers could have had potentially Tua. The Dolphins would have had Justin Herbert. How would that have shaped reality? But also, were either one of these guys better than Jalen Hurts or Jordan Love? Could they have picked either one of those guys, and would that have changed their destiny? So, honorable mention of those guys. They're both solid quarterbacks, so we'll leave them alone. At number five, we have one of the worst first round picks who ended up not even playing for this team ultimately. Damian Arnett for the Raiders. In this mock draft we just went over with Mel Kiper, he wasn't even on this pick. So this guy was drafted first round and he ended up in mock drafts not even being on Mel Kiper's pick. He wasn't even on the map. And for good reason. He ended up playing 13 games and 7 starts, and then he ended up just fizzling out of the league after 1 year. 19th overall pick. And later in that draft, they could have had Trayvon Diggs or Jalen Johnson for the Bears. The Raiders, what are you doing? Don't worry, Raiders, you'll be back. At number four, we have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was one of the most disgraced players in the Brick Jameson universe for many reasons that we've talked about many times on the show. But worst of all, the Chiefs had a scenario to draft not only DeAndre Swift, but also Jonathan Taylor. You would have think about this Chiefs dynasty if they drafted Jonathan Taylor and they had arguably the best running back in football for a period of time. The Chiefs fumbled. Instead, they drafted the bum that was Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the bust, the fraud, and the disgraced figure of the Brick Jameson universe. At number three, we have Chase Davion Clowney, aka Chase Young, the second overall pick, the prince that was promised for the Washington Commanders. And well, this wasn't a great pass rusher draft. This guy being drafted second overall, when you have figures like Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and AJ Terrell also, just a couple of picks down the road, like you drafted Chase Young as supposed to be that best edge rusher, and he ends up just being wherever he is now with the Saints, fizzling out and becoming the next Jadeveon Clowney. Now, this next guy here had lethal speed coming out of college, and unfortunately, the lethal speed came off of the football field as well. Henry Ruggs at number two. This guy was drafted over CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Justin Jefferson, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Brandon Ayuk. This guy, he started off relatively well in the John Gruden Raiders period, but then one faithful night, he's driving at 4 a.m., going 160 miles an hour, were nearly triple over the intoxication levels legally. He ends up killing a woman and her dog, and he's in prison now. So at this point, Henry Ruggs, hopefully we see him again. Unfortunately, he won't be able to team up with the Aaron Hernandez and OJ Simpsons of the world, but we'll see who ends up joining the longest yard roster with Henry Ruggs. At number one, though, a guy who somehow, despite playing an extra 3 years of football with Henry Ruggs not, was somehow worse than the guy that committed murder going 160 miles an hour. How about Jalen Reagor at number one, the ultimate miss? Whether it's drafting Ricky Rubio and Mike and Johnny Flynn over Steph Curry, or it's drafting a number of other draft mistakes that I can't even think of off the top of my head. Jalen Reagor, the pick before Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson, who could go down as the best receiver of our time, Jalen Rieger goes ahead of him, who just finally cracked 1,000 yards in his entire career. The Patriots rejected him. The Chargers rejected him with their receiver core. And the Eagles, ultimately, because of how bad this pick was, they had to go out and trade multiple draft picks in order to get A.J. Brown and securing him. Jalen Rieger, the worst pick in the 2020 draft.
Yeah, the worst pick in the 2020 draft by far in a year where the Eagles could have gotten Justin Jefferson and Jalen Hurts. They decided to get Jalen Rager and Jalen Hurts and then have to draft Devontae Smith the next year, but that's neither here nor there.
Of course. Now, I'm a guy who is always a glass half empty, but you, on the other hand, you're a guy who's a glass half full, always looking and spinning the positives here. So, of the 2020 draft, who was the best and brightest? Unleash those documents, the ultimate pillars of success in this 2020 draft.
Yeah, so the top 5 picks and teams and segments of the draft in this scenario, we are going to be going over this based on how impressive it was, just where they were taken, and the people who were taken after and before them with how impressive this was. And for teams that are confusing in their ways and teams in a way where they kind of just continue to shock you with how bad they have been at drafting, I'm honestly have to give credit to the Las Vegas Raiders for finding a way to take back to back wide receivers and have both of them be out of the league within 3 years. I mean, honestly, I feel like it's impressive. Pick 81 and 80 in the draft in round 3. You take back to back wide receivers, and both of them turn out to be two of the biggest busts in the draft. I mean, they're taking a page out of the Patriots book, taking a page out of the Philadelphia Eagles book as far as like whiffing on wide receivers. Like this takes it to a whole new level where it's actually kind of impressive. So I have to give credit where credit is due. At number 5, we have the Raiders for seemingly drafting two of the biggest busts in the draft in back to back picks. At number 4, we have the Baltimore Ravens for in round 3 stealing one of the best defensive linemen in the draft. They got Namade Matabike at the third round, pick 71 of the NFL draft. And I feel like he's been their anchor on the defensive line over the past few years. He's been a dominant force for him. And I definitely think he's been more valuable than Chase Young, who's the number 2 overall pick. So I feel like the Commanders would still be in a better position today if you pick someone like Matabike. So I have to go with the Ravens at number 4 for picking up Namadi Matabike, one of the most underrated picks in the draft, flying under the radar in round 3. And then in round 2, have to give credit to the Colts for essentially solidifying their offense for the next half decade, where you pick up your number 1 option at wide receiver, and then you also take the only great running back in this draft. Jonathan Taylor's the only guy who's a solidified number 1. Michael Pittman can be a number 1, so you pretty much drafted 2 players that you ended up paying. So now you have your team for the next 8 years pretty much solidified on offense. So you started out 2020 well. So at number 3, we have the Colts taking Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor, best running back in the draft and best wide receiver available. And then at number 2, we have the Cincinnati Bengals, who not only took Joe Burrow, number 1, they took T. Higgins in the second round. And then in the third round, they took Logan Wilson, who's been a great linebacker for them. So you pick up someone on defense, you pick up your franchise quarterback over the next few years, and you pick up T. Higgins, who helped you get to a Super Bowl and has been great for you. We'll see if you end up paying him, but I feel like they were the second strongest team in this draft, being able to pick up Higgins, Logan Wilson, and Joe Burrow. And then at number 1, you have the Philadelphia Eagles stealing the best quarterback in this draft and the only quarterback outside of Joe Burrow currently in the NFL who's beat Patrick Mahomes. You go out there, get rid of Carson Wentz, draft your franchise quarterback. Everyone was confused by this move. You took a gamble, but you went out there, got it done. Now you've been to 2 Super Bowls with him. So we'll see what the future holds with Jalen Hurts. But the Eagles turn their entire franchise around in this draft and have accomplished more so far because of this draft than the Cincinnati Bengals.
That's metal. Yeah, exactly. The Eagles succeeding, the Bengals, a lot of those players you mentioned, what brought them to the Super Bowl that year. and then everybody else you mentioned getting those steals in the draft. But 2020 draft, we're going to definitely do more of these recaps moving forward, especially with the 2018 draft. That'll probably be our next one, but make sure to stay tuned as we break down all these teams. But 2020 draft coming down as one of the most iconic drafts in recent memory.
Yeah, speaking of iconic drafts in recent memory, there's one team that's like in 2012, and you think of 2012, oh, it's not that long ago. It is 13 years ago. And there's this one team who's decided, like, we're just going to build our team in the draft. So from 2012 on, we're going to tank. We're going to have a system in place. And the OG system in place in Philadelphia was a process. So instead of having systems in place, we had processes in place. And Philadelphia is like, we're going to have a process where we suck so bad all of our fans hate us, and then we're going to go out there and draft players like Michael Carter Williams and Ben Simmons and Jaleel Okafor, and we're just going to call it a process, and y'all have to stick with us because we know how to waste first round picks. So we're going to dive into the process for Philadelphia over the next 10 to 15 minutes here, go through each draft pick from 2012 on, how it's panned out, kind of their free agency signings, and then we're going to go through each playoff appearance, who they played and who they lost to, and recap just how successful this process is. Also, with the context of Paul George's contract right now and Joel Embiid and what he is due over the next 4 years, because when it all comes together, it is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's absurd how bad this process has become. This really started in 2013, 2014. And as you mentioned, it's basically we're going to suck until we're good. Unfortunately, they still suck. So what's going on here? Ironically, so we'll go over the records of each of these teams, of each of these seasons and how it panned out, who their draft pick was and how they improved over the following season. Um, Ironically enough, the first 7 years of this process, which is now at this point in like over a decade long, Bruce Brown was the head coach through all of these seasons. So I have their records here and I have their draft picks that followed. So going into the process, they had the 11th overall pick after their team was 34 and 48 with Doug Collins and their top win share guy being Thaddeus Young. Yes, that's real. Their very first selection with the process to get this ball rolling with the 11th pick in the NBA draft, the Philadelphia 76ers selected Michael Carter Williams. Now, you're probably wondering, who the fuck is Michael Carter Williams? Or better yet, where is this man? Last time seen in Orlando in 2023. Um, Notable picks after Michael Carter Williams: Steven Adams for the OKC Thunder, Kelly Olynyk, and then just 5 picks later,
Kelly.
none other than Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's right. They could have started their rebuild with Giannis, but instead, Michael Carter Williams prevail.
Okay, so for Philadelphia, year one, we miss Giannis. All right. Boston took Kelly Olynyk, but they got Tatum and Brown. So, but like Michael Carter Williams, I remember him like just being like fine, and then he went to like Chicago, and then I think he went to Orlando, and then he was just cracked out of the league from there.
He's just one of those guys that gets traded every deadline at this point. Maybe not so much anymore. I think now he plays overseas, but his career has been him being traded. He got traded to Milwaukee, he played for Chicago, he played for the Hornets, he played for the Rockets. Like he's played everywhere. But given their success, right? They go out and get their guy, Michael Carter Williams. He's going to be the savior to start this process. They start out 19 and 63, and they're one of the worst teams in the NBA. In fact, they're so bad that ping pong's fall and they are the third overall pick in the 2014 draft. Now, this draft we can't bully them too much because they went out and drafted Joel Embiid, which if you look at this draft, he's the best player in this draft.
That's
Before
Wiggins and
him was
Parker's draft too.
Yeah, that was for those who forget. Uh, Andrew Wiggins, Jabari Parker, Joel Embiid, and then the picks following are Aaron Gordon, Dante Exum, Marcus Smart, Julius Randle, and then the rest begin to fizzle out from there.
Because
Zach
Embiid was in
Levine's,
Kansas too with Wiggins, I think, and he got hurt. And then
yep.
Philadelphia just took him because he was a project, but they thought he could be the best player in the draft, and turns out he was. To be fair, and I'm
Well,
not a fan of Joel Embiid by any stretch, but
well, interesting development in what we say here. So Joel Embiid was the third overall pick, but in the second round, The ping pongs fell during a Taco Bell commercial. Nikola Jokic was drafted with the 41st pick. Maybe Joel Embiid was not the best player in this draft after all.
Okay, so we could have had Jokic and Giannis. All right.
Well, they could have had Giannis and Joker because f- not one but two picks before they had the 39th overall pick. Joker was picked 41st, and they selected with the 39th pick Jeremy Grant. They drafted Jeremy Grant over Nikola Jokic.
The Sixers did.
The Sixers did, yeah. The Sixers
So you could
also
have
had
had
a chance again earlier in the draft where they could have drafted like a Spencer Dinwiddie or maybe a role player like Joe Harris, but instead they took KJ McDaniels.
they could have had the three best big men in the league today on the same
Yep.
team. They could have had Giannis, who was still a project. So people were like, well, if they took Giannis, they wouldn't have the top pick. Like Giannis was horrible his first few years. What are you talking about? And then you have Joel Embiid, and then you could have taken Jokic instead of Jeremy Grant. Like you realistically, you would have had five
Three
MVPs
superstars.
on the same team if you
Yeah.
tally in like Jokic two, Giannis two,
Hmm.
and then Embiid one. It's like
Yeah. Yeah. And even so, like there's some role players they missed out on. Like Spencer Dinwiddie was successful. He was drafted by Detroit. And then Joe Harris was the very next pick from Cleveland. Cleveland went out and got Joe Harris. So already starting off with not one, not two, not three, but four misses. But they go into their draft now. They have Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid, for those who forget, was hurt his entire first two seasons. He did not play until 2016 because of injury. So they go in with their guy not being there. They go 18 and 64, getting worse. Surprisingly, who would have thought? And then they have the third overall pick again. Lucky for them. And 2015, who's some of the notable guys in 2015? Carl Anthony Towns was the first overall pick. D'Angelo Russell. Later on in this draft, the very next pick, there's Kristaps Porzingis, and there's Miles Turner later on. Devin Booker's in this draft,
D
and they
Book.
take
Oh, you could have D Book
yeah,
and Jokic and Giannis.
yeah. But even with the fourth overall pick, they could have had Porzingis. Instead, they take Jahlil Okafor, who is one of the biggest busts ever. Is he one of the biggest busts ever? He's up there. Just to
The
start.
racism in the NBA, where you can take someone like Jahlil Okafor and DeAndre Ayton, and that's fine, but someone like Kristaps Porzingis gets drafted, and then you get a, a rant heard around the world with "Who the is Tingus Pingus" from Michael Rappaport, and then going viral from that. But like, no, Philadelphia drafting Jahlil Okafor, Cleveland drafting Anthony Bennett. Phoenix drafting DeAndre Ayton, just being lazy and not scouting, that gets a pass. But if it's like Luka or someone like Porzingis, like, oh, suddenly it's a meme now. Like, great.
Yeah, honest to God. But they miss on him. They could have had Porzingis. He was the very next pick. But all these guys are projects. But at the same time, you have opportunities in multiple instances to go out and get somebody, and you fail miserably, to be completely honest. So if we go further down in this draft, Philadelphia misses out on Pat Connaughton, who they could have gotten in the second round. And then that's kind of it. The rest of the draft's pretty mid. But notable people in this draft they missed out on: Kristaps Porzingis being one of them, Devin Booker, Miles Turner, and they missed again.
Yeah, no, you could have had at least Devin Booker, Jokic, and Giannis so far. So a player from each draft. So let's keep building this super team.
Yes, the super team of missed drafts. Well, after multiple consecutive failed drafts at this point, Joel Embiid, by the way, still not playing. Um, they have one of the worst seasons in NBA history. They go 10 and 72 with Bruce Brown.
Brett
They
Brown.
really
Yeah.
embrace sucking, really, 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 really badly over the next year or so. So, what do? They have the 20. They have the first overall pick at this point. They've sucked for so long. They're like, you know what? Let's throw this guy a bone. And what do? They go out and draft Ben Simmons with the first overall pick. Notable picks afterwards: the second overall pick, Brandon Ingram; third
Jalen
overall,
Brown.
Jalen Brown. Yep, you got
Finals
it. Jamal
MVP.
Murray was seventh overall. Demonte
Marcus Smart.
Sabonis, yeah, Demonte Sabonis is 11, and those are ones that within play, like just there alone, you could have had Jalen Brown. You're talking about this Philadelphia team to me feels kind of like how the Bills have been with the Chiefs, where they just kind of hand them stars. We haven't even gone over the elephant in the room, which we'll go over in the next draft, but they could have had Jalen Brown with the first overall pick, or at least even Brendan Ingram. I think would have panned out a little better than Ben Simmons.
Most players would have panned out. You could have had Jamal Murray, Jokic, and then they still would have ended up being on the same team, and Devin Booker at this point if we're going back to the other drafts. Or you could have had a backcourt of Jalen Brown and Devin Booker and Giannis. Like this team like had the potential to be so great with how many top draft picks that you just couldn't figure out at all.
Well, don't worry, it gets worse for Philly fans, unfortunately. 2017 draft, they're the third overall pick. Philly and Boston is number one. Boston trades their third overall pick to the number one overall pick because we all know at number two that Lonzo Ball was going to be drafted by the Lakers. So they trade with Philly to go to number three. And Philly drafts Markel Fultz, whose win shares to this point is 8.4. Let me see if I can find the trade and what it's become. I'll pull that up. But that's the elephant in the room. I mean, you have arguably the face of the league, if not a guy who has consistently made conference finals appearances and will ultimately go down as one of the top five players in the league at this point,
The
Jason
most
Tatum.
points scored in the 2020s, Jason Tatum. The most points scored before the age of 27.
Yeah,
Like
the
that's what you
accolades pour
missed.
on.
That's what you missed for Ben Simmons or Tyrese Maxey. Yeah. You missed Jalen Brown for
Yeah,
Ben Simmons and you missed Jason Tatum for Tyrese Maxey. And the Lakers also missed both of them too.
yeah. And they all missed out. Yeah, and then let's not talk about. I mean, that was an era of Lonzo Ball and LeVar Ball, and there was a lot of controversy around there. This was the Magic Johnson Lakers. The Lakers could have also had Jason Tatum, who would have probably ultimately ended up in New Orleans for the Anthony Davis trade. But yeah, this is a pick that has not aged well, to say the least. Um, and then, yeah, like we mentioned earlier, notable names in this draft. We also have De'Aaron Fox at number 5. We have Laurie Markkinen's in here. We have um, Donovan Mitchell, who's the 13th overall pick. Bam Adebayo's in this draft. There's a lot of very solid players in this draft.
Yeah, Bam or Laurie Markkinen with Embiid and Jimmy Butler would have been a good pairing because he's more of a facilitating big man. So he would have been a good passer for them. De'Aaron Fox, just a run point for Embiid, would have been much better in this draft than Ben Simmons. Or,
Oh, yeah.
uh, the player who has the most points in the 2020s also would have been good.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I can't find this trade for Jason Tatum, but um, we all know who won that trade. So that panned out well. And then
I
so they
think they
go in
just
with their
swapped picks and the Celtics got like a second for it. Nothing too
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. And then in 2018 with their new first overall pick, they go into after having the worst season in NBA history, they are now 28 and 54. So not quite the worst of the worst, but Bruce Brown's job is hanging by a thread. They need to make the playoffs. They go 28 and 54. So in the draft, they have the 10th overall pick because they have improved. And they draft Mikal Bridges, who they ultimately end up trading in return. Let me see if I can
For
see what
who?
they get in return. That's what I'm trying to see.
Yeah, you need
Mikal,
some shooting
Mikal.
on this team too. Like Mikael Bridges would have been a great fit
All
for
right.
Dario
So,
Saric.
yeah. So they end up getting Zaire Smith and a 2021 first round pick for trading away Mikal Bridges. They trade him immediately to the Suns. So they hit on somebody. Mikal Bridges being successful with the Knicks right now, and then they trade him for Zaire Smith.
Yeah,
So
instead of Markel Fultz, let's trade Mikael Bridges right away.
yeah, he's our savior that we're needing. Um, in this draft, I mean, they hit on Mikal Bridges. They could have just kept him. But even if they didn't, the very next pick is SGA. They could have had SGA with that pick, who was drafted by the Hornets. And then we have Miles Bridges later in that draft. Dante DiVincenzo, Grayson Allen's in this draft, Robert Williams. Um, I would say even if they kept Mikal Bridges, they had SGA the very next pick that they could have had, a guy who's in the MVP conversation.
Yeah, there you go. Another MVP on your team that they whiffed on.
Yeah, and then Zaire Smith, which was a massive mess. Zaire Smith's already out of the league at this point. Woof. And
Hey,
then they
this
draft
process is
Landry
going
Shamet.
great.
Yeah, well, they did hit on Landry Shamet. He's a fine role player in this draft. Very cool. But then eventually they make the playoffs and they are 52-30. And then they make the playoffs after massive improvements. We see Joel Embiid start to emerge, Ben Simmons thriving. And then what happens in the playoffs after that?
Yeah, in 2018, let's pull that up. So
Yeah,
I
their
have
first year
each of
making the play.
their playoff performances, and then we'll go through each round that they won. But like, they established the process here, and then this is kind of where they stop having top draft picks here. So they missed out on Giannis, Devin Booker, Jokic. Um, they also missed
SGA.
out on SGA, and then they missed out on Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum. So arguably you missed out on the top five players in the league at this point. So that's great. If you count SGA, Jokic, and Tatum are probably all in the top five at this point. So now that you've
Yes.
missed out of three of the top five players in the league, let's go through what you did in the playoffs. So you qualify for the playoffs in 2018. You defeat Miami 4-1, and then you move on to the conference semifinals. Then you lose to Boston in a gentleman's sweep 5-1. You're out of the round. And this was Brad Stevens versus Brett Brown early on. First time the 76ers are making the playoffs. I believe this is pretty early for Boston. I think this is maybe the second year that they made the playoffs, maybe the first year as well, but pretty early on for both
Yeah.
teams.
Yeah. And the Miami team they beat, I don't even think Dwayne Wade was there anymore. This is when they just had like Bam, Kelly Olynyk. Dwayne Wade was in his final season. This was like the end of Miami. But they beat him, whatever. Well, they improve upon that. And in the draft, at this point, I mean, they have Ty Jerome with the 24th pick, who they end up trading. But ultimately, not really anybody they could have drafted that would have been elite. They had Carson Edwards in this draft as well, a trade that I believe they swung with the Celtics, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So the draft picks become a little less worthy at this point.
Yeah, the Celtics turned Carson Edwards into Derek White, though.
That's true.
So
Yeah,
there you go.
Carson Edwards was initially with the Sixers here, but yeah, they go from 52-30 to 51-30, and they make the playoffs again with Bruce Brown, Joel Embiid leading the team in win shares. But what happens when they make the playoffs?
Yeah, so then they make the playoffs again in 2019. They're the third seed, 51-31. They end up defeating the Brooklyn Nets 4-1. But this is the Kawhi Leonard year, and this is the year where that ball bounces on the rim as many times as you can count with Jimmy Butler, JJ Redick, Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid. Still not enough to beat Kawhi Leonard, Marcus Gasol, and that loaded Raptors team. And when you look back on it, like that was a stacked roster. They went 7 games. So I feel like if the 76ers were going to do it any year, it would have been 2019 because you gave the
Yeah,
champs a 7 game series.
yeah, and let's be honest. Like we look at this team, you have peak Joel Embiid, you have peak Ben Simmons, Jimmy Butler is firing on all cylinders. You also have nice role players like Bogdan Bogdanovic. You have Landry Shaman in there. You have Dario Saric, JJ Redick's on this team. Like this
Tobias
team,
Harris still.
yeah, Tobias Harris is there. They have Robert Covington, Wilson Chandler, Corey Brewer. Like there's some dogs on this team. This was one of their probably their best team that they had, and then that double doink was ultimately what cost them. They did beat the um, Nets team with Spencer Dinwiddie and Jarrett Allen and Joe Harris. So clap their hands there, I guess. And then they kind of relapse a little bit in 2020. It's the COVID year. Whatever happens. But they go 43-30. They make the playoffs. This is the final season with Bruce Brown, and then the first round comes.
Yeah, and then first round, this is the COVID year. First year without Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler leaves after the meltdown in 2019. So at this point, you have chosen to pay Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler, and that's why it's gone. I repeat, you have chosen to pay Tobias Harris instead of Jimmy Butler, and now he's gone. And then so you lose to Boston 0-4 in the first round, and you get swept out of the playoffs. And then Boston goes on to lose to who? Jimmy Butler. And Jimmy Butler ends up going to the finals that year. So I wonder what would have happened if you paid Jimmy Butler instead of Tobias Harris. Maybe the 76ers go to the finals in that COVID year. I don't know. But Jimmy Butler and Joel Embiid are a much more formidable matchup against Boston than just Joel Embiid.
Yeah, I would say so. And the funny thing about this too is Tobias Harris is the richest non. He has made the most money in NBA history, not making an All Star team, and that is
There you
thanks
go.
to the Sixers. So thanks to the Sixers, thanks to the Pistons, and wherever he's roaming now in his career. But this was the beginning of the end for the process, I would say. Getting swept by the Celtics. Celtics would lose to Jimmy Butler. The following season, they hire the great Doc Rivers, friend of the show.
Doc
They improve.
Rivers.
They go 49-23. They make the playoffs again. And then what happens?
Yeah, so they defeat Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal
The
in the first
Wizards?
round.
Oh,
Yep, they
man.
beat the Wizards in the
Okay.
first round. They beat that Russell Westbrook led Wizards team with Bradley Beal.
The
And
34 and
then
38 team, by the way.
yeah. So there's that. So you beat them 4-1, you let them get a game, and then you get to the conference semifinals and you lose to the Hawks. And this is the point where I am all out on the process with Joel Embiid is you get to the semifinals and you lose to the Hawks with Trey Young when you have Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons still in their prime this year. You should be getting to the finals. We're going to get the two best big men in the league, Joel Embiid and Giannis, going up against each other. And we haven't seen the 76ers match up with the Milwaukee Bucks in the playoffs, and we were supposed to get that showdown this year, but no. You lose to Trey Young and the Hawks in 6 games, and Joel Embiid completely quits, melts down, and disappears. And this was the moment that I had with the Sixers where I'm like, this team's never going to do it, and they're never getting past the second round. Like, something happens every single time. If you're going to lose to Trey Young and the Hawks, it's over.
Yeah. And let's not forget, this was the beginning of the Daryl Morey era. This team had Seth Curry. They had obviously Joel Embiid. They had Danny Green, Tobias Harris, George Hill. We had old Dwight Howard in there. Tyrese Maxey's on this team at this point as well. Um, I believe they just recently moved on from Ben Simmons in this era, but they're still better. You look at this Hawks roster, they have uh, Trey Young, there's Rajon Rondo, Lou Will, Danilo Gallinari, but this team that they were facing was 41-31 in the playoffs, in the regular season, and then they go out.
Did you say
They end up
Rondo
making the
was on the
conference.
Hawks?
Yeah, the Rondo was on that Hawks team.
Bro. Bro
Was
has
he?
a way of finding his way around the league and being on sneaky contenders. Like him making his way through the Hawks to the Pelicans and then winning
Lakers.
another finals with the Lakers.
Yeah, yeah, Rondo's that dude, Hall of Famer. But that Hawks team ends up losing to the Bucks, who ends up winning the finals. But the Sixers are down bad post Ben Simmons era, and then ultimately final season with Doc Rivers, they do improve. They go 51-31. We're in 2022 at this point. Joel Embiid leads the team in win shares, and then what happens?
Yeah, so in 2022, you finish as the fourth seed and you get to the playoffs and then you beat the Toronto Raptors in the first round. It takes you 6 games to do it. People are kind of like scratching their head a little bit, like what happened there. And then you get to the semifinals, and then you lose in 6 to Miami, where Jimmy Butler kind of just decides that he owns the 76ers and Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid kind of just quiet quits again at the end of that series. But Miami ends up just winning 4-2 versus Philadelphia, and it's kind of just at this point where it turns in a second round exit being the norm for them, kind of routine after this series.
Yeah, it looks like this was kind of the turning point for them where they had to make some big swings in order for them to get over the hump. And so they do. They make some moves in the offseason. And then this is the final season with Doc Rivers. I believe this is when they join with James Harden. They trade for James Harden from did they trade him from um, Brooklyn? If I
Yeah,
remember
they
correctly,
trade
I
Ben
believe he went.
Simmons for James Harden.
Ah, yes, that's right. Yes, because that's right. Because Ben Simmons didn't play because he, I don't know, like hurt his back or he was sad or something. I don't remember.
He was sad.
He was sad. He's like, I'm sad. I'm on the Sixers. I keep losing in the second round. This
Khloe
is what happens
Kardashian
when you
hurt
play
my
for.
back.
Yeah, literally. And
Did he
so yeah,
drug me? I can't play.
yeah, and then so they trade for James Harden. They go 54-28. Final year with Doc Rivers, and then what happens next?
Yeah, so you beat Brooklyn in the first round. Congratulations. You beat a bunch of nobodies in a 4-0 sweep. And then you lose to the Boston Celtics in 7, but you were up 3-2 in the series. And James Harden gave you two 40-point games in the series as well, where he gave you a massive game 1 where he stole a game without Joel Embiid playing, and then James Harden also in game 5 went off, got 46 points, and really was the reason why Philadelphia won. And then you just needed a closeout game from Joel Embiid, but we get a Jason Tatum special in game 6 where he went off and got over 50 points in that game. And then in game 7, all hell broke loose in TD Garden, and everyone and their mother hit like 2-3 threes where they kind of just shot you out of the gym. Grant Williams was hitting threes, and when he's hot, Boston's pretty tough to stop, at least in that era. And then Boston goes on, ends up losing to Miami that year as well.
Yeah, and then Sixers are back to the drawing board. They're like, we've lost in the semifinals now 5 of the last 6 seasons with multiple coaches. Doc Rivers is the problem. Doc Rivers is canned. They hire Nick Nurse, and they do make some moves in the offseason. I believe this is when they get rid of Joel and James Harden. James Harden then goes to the Clippers. And then this team, Tyrese Maxey's emerging as a star. You have Joel Embiid, and then they get some role players like the Pat Beverleys of the world, Nicholas Batum's, Kyle Lowry joins their forces. Tobias Harris is still there. They end up going 47-35. This past season, of course. Tyrese Maxey leads the team in win shares, and then what happens next?
Yeah, and then you lose to the Knicks in 6. And then 2 of
Yeah,
those games you definitely should have won. Like you lose to an inferior team in a series where you definitely should have won, and the Knicks were definitely outmanned. They just wanted it more than you did in the series. This was kind of the series though that Tyrese Maxey emerged, where he was kind of deferring still in the playoff run previously to James Harden and Joel Embiid, where he really came into his own in this playoff series, and he's been the best part of their season this year. But yeah, Tyrese Maxey kind of emerges as a star, which is a bright spot, but you still lose to a team that not a lot of people thought should have beat you in this situation, where you had clearly had the best player on the court, but you just didn't have
you
any
have the
help.
best player on the court, and your team was at this point like this is a team that's been in the playoffs several times. This is a team that we've been waiting for them to go over the hump. You move on from Ben Simmons relatively successfully, and then you have James Harden. You move on from successfully. You have Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid, and you can't beat the Villanova boys of Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, like pretty much a bunch of role players, and then Jalen Brunson, who's playing out of his mind, who's playing like Michael Jordan at that point. Like that's the
Yeah.
team you lose to. You basically just lose to the team that played, put their heart in. Like basically just a team that was playing with a lot of compassion and playing as a team. Like, come on, this isn't fucking this isn't a family movie. Sixers, come on.
Yeah. You know,
And
it's
then
what
where
it
are they
felt
now?
like.
And where are they
Yes,
now?
not in a great situation because right now, if you look at Joel Embiid's contract, He is owed 59 million next year, fully guaranteed, and then the next 3 years after that, it's 69 million, 69 million, 69 million. So essentially, $200 million guaranteed plus over the next 4 years. When this year, it doesn't look like Joel Embiid is really a solution with this team, where he looks just hurt again this season. They're already talking about shutting him down, and then you also just paid Paul George, where he's now going to have $146 million left guaranteed. So now you're kind of saddled with two superstars who feel like their career is pretty much over. With Joel Embiid, like, he feels like a really old 30 at this point, and I don't think he's going to give you any all-star production level performances in the playoffs. And I think you should have traded him last season, because as that goes on, if you can't trade him this offseason, like, who's going to want to honestly take on this contract for an old, broken down star who is definitely playing a lot older than he is, and he's scheduled to make 200 plus million over the next 4 years, and he may play 100 games over those next 4 years.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. I mean, let's not forget when we were talking about the process here. He missed the first 2 seasons of his career with several knee injuries, and then he does finally play. He's never played more than 68 games, and then obviously, like when he plays, he's one of the best in the league. But it's keywords when. This year he's played 20 games, and then he played 30 games last year. Like he's already shown that he's been injury prone beginning of his career, and then it's only getting worse now that he's entered his 30s. This is a guy that's made a shit ton of money. This is a guy that if he retires, he's still going to be considered one of the better big mans of the era. But at this point, like, what can the Sixers do? This process has been a massive failure, led with massive draft busts and terrible signings, terrible decisions front office wise. Like this has been a perpetual failure. And at the root of all that, it's been Joel Embiid as the face of your franchise who doesn't play consistently, doesn't go to back to backs, doesn't practice as hard. Is this the guy that we want to continue with if we're going to rebuild the Sixers again?
Yeah, and I feel like it's heading for a breakup, and that would pretty much essentially be surrendering every single pick of the process as not panning out. And then you had this, oh, we have the process here, but Milwaukee went out there, built a championship team with Chris Middleton and Giannis, Brooke Lopez, Drew Holiday, and got it done. Boston went out there and did it at the same time you were drafting pretty much, and they just hit on two of your picks and you missed on two of yours, where they get two players who could have easily been the finals MVP last year. And they had players like Marcus Smart that they flipped in Kristaps Porzingis, and then just like with front office wise, flipping someone like Carson Edwards for Derek White instead of just turning Mikal Bridges into nothing. You're like, what if I can make this asset just disappear? And it seems like that's what Philadelphia did, like, over so much of the past 13 years, and now we're at a point where it's pretty much the end of this process, and you pretty much set your team back two,
5 years.
3 decades, where you've just disappointed your fans, ripped their hearts out, and you've been nothing but disappointing, because you've had teams that have had the potential to go out there and win a finals. Paying someone like Tobias Harris instead of Jimmy Butler, then bringing in
Mm.
James Harden, letting him walk, and James Harden's still kind of balling right now, and he definitely could have helped you beat the Knicks last year. Like, I think you moved on from him way too quickly, and then even James Harden, I feel like James Harden has been more valuable this season as a basketball player than Paul George.
Oh yeah, Paul George's contract's a mess. I would also say, like you mentioned Milwaukee and Boston, but also the guy that you moved on from went to Miami and made 2 finals and played toe to toe. He played against the Lakers in the bubble, and then obviously he plays against the Nuggets. Like there's an opportunity where even though he didn't win the finals, you still had the guy that you broke up with winning the marriage 1,000 times over, and now he's in Golden State where the Warriors have completely turned around and looks like they might not even be in the play-in tournament at this point. The Sixers have been a complete disaster. And meanwhile, every team that's around them is building up. Even the Knicks are doing better than them at this point. So, yeah, the Sixers, they probably need to break up with Joel Embiid. I think he'll be traded this offseason. That's my prediction. Um, and then everybody around you, all the breakups that you've had, James Harden's doing fine in LA. And then Jimmy Butler and the Warriors have made a beautiful relationship already.
Jimmy Butler and the Warriors have made a crazy relationship, and this was a trade where a lot of people were like, I don't want Jimmy Butler going to the Warriors." And Jimmy Butler, like, for someone who's made the finals twice and accomplished a lot more than some of these other superstars in the NBA with less, feels like he gets a lot of hate. But ever since he's been with Golden State, they have been 6-1 in games that he plays. And then they've also gone from the 18th ranked offense up to the 5th ranked offense, and then they've gone from the 10th ranked defense all the way up to the best defense in the league right now. And then he's increased their net rating all the way up to 17 at this point. And just the fact that they're 6-1 now that he's on the floor, and he's moved them all the way out of the play-in tournament, and the amount of games that he moved them up in the standings, like, it's a respectable record now when they went from the A seed in the West, and now they're at the number 6 spot, and they're 31-27, and are able to elevate their record with 24 games left. Steph Curry just had 50 points on the night we're recording this. So, like, it seems like this was the perfect move for them, and it just made the most sense at the time, because you're taking a guy like who's on the same time frame as Steph Curry, who has been to the finals, like, outside of Steph right now, outside of like Giannis, Jokic, LeBron, Tatum, and Brown, who else has accomplished more than Jimmy Butler at this point in the NBA? So you're looking at him, and then maybe Kevin Durant, but like the way Butler affects the game, it's more of just controlling the pace, facilitating, playing defense, and kind of just being a calming force. And I thought this was a match made in heaven, but a lot of people didn't like this trade when it first happened. Thought it was kind of just like, oh, well, they'll be frisky. Like, no, like, I think Golden State is going to dominate some people when you have two players as good as Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler. Like, we've seen what LeBron looks like with another star, and with Jimmy Butler and Steph, like, this is the best player that Jimmy Butler's ever played with.
Yeah, that's true. And Golden State, I mean, this is an organization that isn't that far removed from winning the title. And you have a lot of young players that are developing. I think a lot of people hate on Jimmy Butler because he's very intense, but I feel like him paired with Draymond Green and then the kind of pedigree that he brought to the Miami Heat and how great they were, I think it's a match made in heaven. I don't know if I can put them quite in the finals yet. I think there's plenty of other teams that could get in their way. However, this team is so much more interesting. You talk about teams like the Nuggets and the Thunder and the Grizzlies, who um, I'm not super convinced on with any of those teams. I think they're still vulnerable. You have Golden State, who have the experience. You have two guys who have made multiple NBA finals, and all in the same window. This was a move that quietly has become the biggest move of the of this trade deadline. Ultimately, might even end up being slightly more successful in the short term than the Luka Doncic trade.
Yeah, and I feel like if you're Golden State, you don't want to play be in the play-in tournament, but you kind of do want to be the seventh seed, because if you get into the play-in tournament, if you're the seventh seed, you're probably going to be playing Memphis, but Memphis is only one game ahead of Denver there, so you're kind of like playing the standings a little bit and trying to play Memphis in the first round, because if you're Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry, you're looking at Memphis, you're like looking at a team like, okay, you're like Draymond and Jimmy Butler can guard Jaron Jackson Jr. and slow him down, and then we're just gonna let John Morant shoot and see what happens. So I know John Morant has improved his shot, but the Grizzlies in the regular season and the playoffs, like, I still need to see Memphis win a playoff series to buy into this team and Taylor Jenkins as a coach.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of questions there. I think they could probably beat any of these teams. I don't think I would trust them against the Nuggets, but I do think a team like the Thunder could be vulnerable. I know that they've been the best team in basketball, but I still think they need to they're still very young. And a team like the Warriors, who they grew up watching, I do think that there's a little bit of legacy there that could impact the Thunder's play. So really, like if they can avoid the Nuggets, then I think they'll be fine. There is a possibility they potentially face the Rockets too if they move up to the 4 seed. I do think that the Lakers will probably move up in the standing as well. But Warriors, I think, are going to be one of those top 2 or 3 teams that we see who end up making the conference finals this upcoming year.
Yeah, I feel like now, like, the way the West is stacked actually makes a lot of sense, because you get to introduce the league to Houston and Luka and LeBron. So like a young team losing to the Lakers, and then you get to introduce people to players like Sangoon on their team and all the young talent that they have. Emi Udoka gets to have a weird back and forth with LeBron that'll be entertaining. And then Golden State gets to beat Memphis probably in six. We get an entertaining series with Denver and the Clippers, but Denver ultimately wins. And then we get Anthony Edwards versus SGA in the first round. And then Anthony Edwards has the potential to upset the Oklahoma City Thunder, and then SGA has the right to kind of snatch away the top spot in the crown and like the best young player in the West away from Luka Doncic, and then he would be playing. We would have SGA versus Luka in the second round, and then we would have Jimmy Butler rematching versus the Nuggets in the playoffs with Steph Curry. So kind of like a finals rematch, but not really.
Yeah, I definitely think that's what we're gonna see. Yeah, I actually love that. So you said that would be Thunder's, Lakers, Nuggets, and Warriors.
Yeah, in the second round, if it plays out how it's currently seated, I think that would make sense for the league.
Yeah, I think that's what the NBA wants, and I think ultimately I would pick. I think we can see Lakers Warriors in the conference finals. Honestly, I feel like that's what they're going to want. I think the Nuggets have owned the Lakers historically. We did have a big win for them against the Nuggets in this post Luka Doncic era. That maybe gives you some hope on how they guard him. But um, can you see a scenario with Lakers and Warriors potentially in the Western Conference Finals?
Yeah, I can definitely see the vision there. I don't know if the Lakers will have enough defense there, and it will be a challenge for Golden State to contain Jokic. But I could definitely see that being a scenario that plays out. I feel like it will be Lakers, Warriors, Thunder, and Nuggets when it's all said and done in the second round, though, because then on the other side we would get Cleveland versus Milwaukee, and then Boston versus New York, most likely. So
Yeah,
that would be a great 8-team semifinal for the NBA. And I feel like most of those series would have the potential to go the distance. Some of them would be sweeps, but I feel like for the most part, those could all be 6 or 7 game series.
yeah, absolutely. That's what we want. And ultimately, I see a scenario where Boston, I think we can say that Boston is comfortably the favorites to make the finals in the East, especially
Yeah.
coming off of the title. But in a scenario where they, with those four teams that remain there, we're talking about potentially a rematch against Golden State, potentially a Lakers Warriors finals, potentially. Two of the best players in the league with the Thunder, with SGA and Jason Tatum, who will be the face of the league, and then ultimately the Nuggets as well, with them potentially going head to head.
Yeah, I think all of those matchups will be really interesting for Boston. But I feel like the most interesting one for the NBA would be Golden State, just because of Jimmy Butler's history with Boston, kind of like having that. It kind of feels like he has something over Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown, where Jimmy Butler has kind of historically owned this team, and he's blocked them from getting to not one but two NBA Finals. Where if it wasn't for Jimmy Butler, Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum could have been to four NBA Finals by now, and potentially have one, two, or three. So like Jimmy Butler blocking them, and then the first time they were supposed to win the finals, Golden State ended up blocking them. So you kind of are going up against all of your demons, and we're really figuring out who the Celtics are made of. If you have to go up against Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry and the Warriors, who have been your nemesis, and you have the Olympic storyline as well with Steve Kerr benching Jason
Mm.
Tatum. So I feel like overall, as far as storylines and beef and bad blood, like Celtics Warriors makes the most sense.
Yeah, it does. And now, do you think there's been a large talking point the last couple of weeks in NBA circles about like face of the league? A lot of people don't want to appreciate Jason Tatum because he's corny and he's kind of boring. And then there's a number of other people that they throw in the hats there. Maybe it's Joker, maybe it's Luca, maybe it's Anthony Edwards, SGA. Um, but if it's ending up being poised where they face the Warriors, they battle their demons against what who they had lost to previously, and then Jimmy Butler, would you say at that point we'd have to put the Celtics and then ultimately Jason Tatum as the face of the league?
Yeah, because he would have dethroned Luka, who's supposed to be in that conversation as well, and then also he would have taken it from the last face of the league in Steph Curry. Like LeBron had his era, but I feel like Steph Curry really took away from LeBron's era. And as far as like a fan favorite, it was more Steph Curry that people were trying to emulate. And I feel like he changed the game in his own respects. I feel like we're kind of in the limbo period with after Steph Curry, who's the face of the league right now. And the media is frankly awful because they're like, well, it can't be. Every discussion around this is like, well, Giannis is good and so is Wemby, but we'd prefer that it's not a foreign player, and neither would the NBA. Like, that's honestly my biggest problem because like it's okay. Like people like are literally like the amount of times on ESPN they're like, well, we can't have a foreign player be the face of the NBA, so that like kicks out Wemby, that kicks out Luka, and that kicks out Giannis. And like the
And
argument
Joker.
with Giannis and Kevin Durant, like you had a real argument there, and people were like, "Oh no, there's no way that Giannis is even close to Kevin Durant." And then it's like, yeah, there's only one reason why, because he's not from the U.S.
Yeah, which I think is ridiculous at this point. I feel like the league has always been three or four major stars, and then you have the guy who's showing the playoff success. Like last decade, it was LeBron and Steph, who were like the Magic and Bird, and then you had like the Kevin Durant's of the world and the James Hardens, and those were like the big four. Maybe you throw in Russell Westbrook as well. Nowadays, it's going to be with just playoff success. Jason Tatum is kind of at the forefront, especially with how that Celtics team is constructed. And then you have SGA who's getting the MVPs just like Harden did, and then Luka Doncic who's on this massive brand now. And then we'll see what happens with Anthony Edwards. But I feel like we're starting to get these superstars of the 2020s beginning to form now in real time.
Yeah, I think so too. I think my biggest problem with the face of the league conversation is always like we're trying to interject players who haven't won a title. Like the first step should be like at least winning an MVP or a title to even be in the conversation. And then at least getting to the NBA finals. Because if like we're talking about Anthony Edwards, like he has everything to be the pace of the league. Like, yeah, except for playoff success. Like, okay, like that should be the number one aspect of being the face of the league. Like, well, he's likable and like everything there. Like he said he didn't want to be the face of the league. And then you also have Luca, who is supposed to be the face of the league, but he hasn't won an MVP when he's been the favorite to be MVP, like 5 out of his 7 seasons here. And then he also doesn't have the playoff success either, and lost to someone who's kind of his alma mater. And then Jokic and Giannis just haven't won a second one, and it feels like their phases of playoff domination haven't been as long as they should. So I feel like with the face of the league, it's like really a waiting game to see who really just comes out and takes it. But like trying to just put someone in there who hasn't even been to a finals, like Anthony Edwards or SGA, it's just way too soon to be anointing them because like SGA and Tatum are the same age, but like SGA has been traded like 3, 4 times now.
Yeah, it's true. I think with the problem with Joker and with Giannis is that both of them are in their 30s now, and it feels like I still think Joker is still at the peak of his powers, but with Giannis, both of these guys are 10, 12 years in the league. And the way that they typically have the face of the league conversations are guys who are ascending and entering into their peak. Jason Tatum's entering into his peak, SGA's entering into his peak, maybe Anthony Edwards as well. And then also like guys that they don't talk about enough, like Wemby, who is one of the most unique players that we've ever seen in the sport. This is a guy that we should absolutely fixate on. If we're not gonna fixate on Joker enough, like Victor Wembanyama, this 7'4" defensive freak who also shoots threes and has a mid range, like this guy could easily be the face of the league. This guy's a unicorn. This is like what we wanted Kristaps Porzingis to be, and although he's banged up now, he's still been relatively healthy through it all, and he's getting better. I think Victor Wembanyama should absolutely be in the mix, but I fear that he might have the same sort of branding that Tim Duncan had, where they don't brand him like he should because of his personality.
Yeah, definitely. Like Kevin Garnett had like a way bigger brand than Tim Duncan did, but he only had one finals appearance.
Yeah, and one
Or well,
MVP.
he only had one finals win, but he made it 3 times. But Tim Duncan won 5 finals, and like I feel like what Tim Duncan did too, like doesn't get appreciated enough either.
Yeah, and I don't understand why. I think if I could form the league, I would say we'd have Luca, Tatum, Joker, and then the other guy kind of has to come out. I mean, whether it's going to be SGA or it's going to be Anthony Edwards. I'm not including Joker because he's in his 30s. I'm not including Giannis. Like those are the guys who I would say is the future face of the league. The fourth guy coming to claim it.
Yeah, because I feel like with my problem with Anthony Edwards is I think that Timberwolves team last year was better than the Suns team that made the finals. And it's like Devin Booker has been to a finals, and at one point he was supposed to be in the conversation of being the next face of the league, and then he's kind of just fallen out of that conversation completely. John Morant
Yeah,
was in that conversation as well. I remember when it used to be like John Morant and or Luka or Tatum, and then it's SGA now, and then people are throwing in Anthony Edwards. It's like Anthony Edwards has to get to NBA Finals, and his team keeps getting worse every single year and making ridiculous trades.
yeah. And then, other people that we could mention too, like Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell's another guy that has some playoff success to be shown. Depending on how the Cavaliers play out this year, I mean, they've been the best team in basketball pretty much all season long. They're on pace to win, somewhere in the mid 60s as far as total wins. If they go out and they fizzle out, like that's going to hurt their reputation. But also, if they go out there and maybe beat the Celtics and make a finals with Donovan Mitchell, I think Donovan Mitchell deserves that. Or better yet, the Knicks with Jalen Brunson. He's the guy that's carried the Knicks on his back for the last 3 years, and they're still in the mix. Like we can see someone like these guys potentially emerge as well.
Yeah, I could also see like predicting upsets right now. I could see Detroit beating the Knicks in the first round, like with the way Tom Thibodeau coaches his team. If everyone gets injured like they normally do, I could definitely see Cade Cunningham like establishing himself because I feel like Cade Cunningham is a better player this season than Jalen Brunson has been in the regular season. It's a lot less hero ball and a lot more facilitating the offense, where sometimes at the end of the game, Jalen Brunson is turning the ball over. And then the Knicks have not won versus a top three team in the NBA so far this season, which is kind of concerning. And they've gotten absolutely wrecked by Boston. Like, I could see a sneaky Detroit team who's the sixth seed right now going to New York and upsetting them in the first round.
Yeah, this Pistons team also is on an absolute rip too. They've won 8 straight games. Cade Cunningham's emerging as a star, and JB Bickerstaff. Say what you will about him, he's turned around this team was when losing 28 consecutive games last year, and now they've turned around. They're going to probably make the playoffs at this point, and this team's completely turned around. Like credit to the Pistons for what they've become, with how bad they were. Remember when we talked about them last year and their history and how pathetic they've been since the Chauncey Billups era? Credit to the Pistons and what they've become.
Yeah, no, honestly, like if they like continue on the pace they're on right now and then beat the Knicks in the first round, like I feel like they definitely are a early upset alert. But also, if they continue on this win streak, they may knock Indiana or Milwaukee into the sixth seed, and then we could see Milwaukee versus New York in the first round and get like Dame and Giannis versus Karl Anthony Towns and Brunson.
Yeah, or better yet, we could also see Pacers and Knicks, which has been a historic rivalry with, going far back as the 80s with that. I feel like matchup wise, they'd probably want Knicks and Pacers, but Milwaukee
Knicks and
and New
Pacers,
York.
and then Milwaukee and Detroit.
Oh, yeah, that could be good. Yeah. Or, and then we look at some of the teams in the consolation bracket too. We got like the Magic, Heat. Actually, all these teams fucking suck. Never mind.
The Hawks and
Never.
Cavs could be interesting, actually, because the Hawks have beat the Cavs twice this year,
Okay. So there's some potential there.
and they traded with each other this year as well for DeAndre Hunter.
Mm,
Atlanta shipped him over to Cleveland, so it's like two teams playing each other in the first round that traded with each other, and then Trey Young versus Donovan Mitchell.
yeah. Yeah, I'm excited for these matchups. I feel like this NBA playoff run has an opportunity to become maybe the best playoff run we've seen in maybe the last decade, potentially.
Oh, for sure. Especially Jimmy
Especially,
Butler with Golden State and Steph Curry. Especially like the first round matchup is probably going to be with Memphis. And then we're also going to get like the Lakers versus the Rockets, which should be a really fun series. And then the Timberwolves potentially versus we would get Anthony Edwards and Ja or Anthony Edwards and SGA. Like playoffs are going to be electric for sure.
Yeah, and then you have Luka with the Lakers. My expectation for the Lakers is I feel like their ceiling is Western Conference Finals, but I think that depending on how long they can avoid the Nuggets, I feel like they could potentially lose in like the first or second round. Um, but their turnaround with JJ Redick has been astonishing. So I do think that they are a sneaky good team, even though they're not that sneaky with Luka Doncic.
Yeah, and I feel like JJ Redick is going to be one of those interesting modern head coaches where he has the feel that players kind of want, and then like a lot of players would go on his podcast and like talking to him where you get that feel of a player who understands you, but he also is so into basketball when he gets frustrated. It's coming from like a almost nerdy position of the game as someone who is a former player, but you also get like the players coach vibe. So like JJ Redick, like a lot of people ripped him being a head coach, but I feel like he is like the perfect, just you're kind of just a personality manager. And as far as personality managers go, like JJ Redick, I feel like as someone who's a veteran is respected throughout the NBA in circles. He had the number one podcast about basketball, at least the most interesting one. So I feel like with him, it's like it was always bound to succeed. It was just, was it right for him to be on the timeline of LeBron James and Anthony Davis? Was where I had my biggest concerns. Like, because you're walking into a situation where Anthony Davis is perpetually hurt. So he's like a old 31 years old. And then you also have LeBron James, who's about to retire in a few years. What are we doing? And then suddenly he gets Luka Doncic, and a clip of JJ Redick on Flagrant goes viral about JJ Redick talking about Luka Doncic. And now it kind of seems like, oh, well, it went from having LeBron and Anthony Davis to now you're set up over the next decade in almost a lucky sort of way where that situation kind of just worked out and he knew it'd figure itself out somehow.
Yeah, and I think also like with JJ Redick, everything you mentioned I agree with. And also I think where he is, like the pressure of LA, I feel like most people would break with that kind of pressure, and I think a lot of coaches have in the past. But someone like JJ Redick, who has had national media coverage, who's been criticized, has been on multiple championship rosters, whether they've won or made it or not. But he's had a lot of scrutiny as well. He was one of the most hated players coming out of college from Duke. Um, he doesn't care about being liked or disliked. He just cares about being successful. And the Lakers, I think the Lakers really lucked out with JJ Redick. And now they have Luka Doncic. And I think he's smart enough to also know what they need, which ultimately now is going to be getting big men to play with him and then getting shooters around him. They got the right brains around with there. So credit to the Lakers and credit to JJ Redick there.
Yeah, no. Credit to the Mavericks GM, though. That's really who you should be giving credit for because that's the only reason why you're set up for success and you're not going to be fired in 3 years after Anthony Davis is hurt and LeBron James retires and you have nothing left to show for it. But this guy gifts you a future. It's almost like, in some way, the NBA told someone to make a trade to shake up the league before the Super Bowl and Pro Bowl week here, and then suddenly caused Patrick Mahomes to be so distraught that he lost to the Philadelphia Eagles because of the Luka Doncic trade. So you literally caused the Chiefs to lose the Super Bowl, and then you gift the Lakers the next 10 years of success in the West. Like, congratulations. Way to boost another franchise and then have someone who gets injured immediately in the first half, which was our concern. But you're also concerned with Luka partying, drinking, and smoking hookah when there's pictures of Dirk Nowitzki absolutely shredded, going viral right now, like him just being high out of his mind. But no, Luka's the problem when you're going to have him over the next decade. But Anthony Davis is just hurt, and then he has another setback and he's out another 2 weeks. Like, that all makes sense. That all makes sense to me.
Yeah, it all makes sense. And then, conspiratorially speaking, the Lakers, what are we going to see the next decade? We're going to see the Lakers Celtics, something that we've seen in 5 of 6 NBA decades that we've spanned from. We saw them in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, skipped in the 90s, but we saw them in the 2000s. And then now we're going to see them in the 2020s, potentially. I would I would call it a lock that we're going to see Lakers Celtics in the next 5 years. The Lakers are going
Probably
to figure it
next
out.
year.
Yeah, I think next year. If my prediction here, I'm going to guess Joel Embiid goes to the Lakers somehow, some way, um, and they pair him with Luka. LeBron maybe retires. That's where I would guess. I feel like I can see Joel Embiid with the Lakers.
Do you think JJ Redick wants Joel Embiid though? I don't know.
Um, I don't know. If they can keep him healthy, that's great. But if they can't, which doesn't seem like they can do it, it's going to fail miserably.
Yeah, I feel like Giannis would probably be more realistic if Milwaukee doesn't win this year. I could definitely see Giannis going to the Lakers.
Yeah, they need a big man. I think he would be a good fit. Um, or maybe it's going after like a um, another big figure here. But I like the idea of Giannis. Giannis's contract is up after next season, I think, right?
Yeah, and I just don't know like how long LeBron is going to play for, and is LeBron being there going to deter another star from wanting to go there if he's going to be there for like another year or two? Because like
Yeah,
what comes with being on a LeBron team is if anything happens or goes wrong, like it's your fault and not his.
yeah, pretty much.
And Luka's going to figure that out this year too.
Yeah, honestly. But I mean, I'm interested to see how the Lakers will play out this year. I think, like I mentioned, I think Western Conference is what we can expect potentially as their ceiling.
You know,
But we talked about the 2020 draft. We talked about the current state of the NBA, the massively failed process that we covered over in great detail as well. Went over the worst top 5 picks of the 2020 draft and the best picks of 2020 as well. We'll be here to talk about all things basketball and football this upcoming week with another Brickyard live stream.
yeah, but most importantly, at the end of the episode, what has been on your mind this week? What have you been watching? What have you been listening to? Any music or shows you've watched stand out, or are you still just on Peaky Blinders?
No, Peaky Blinders is getting boring. But I watched this really depressing movie. And that's what I'll shout out. If you've never seen the movie When the Wind Blows, if you ever want to watch a movie that has no happy moments at all and it's just pure sadness and despair and dark themes, When the Wind Blows, check it out. Produced musically by David Bowie, which is kind of cool. Really awkward English animation. I watched this one night. I got blasted, and I saw this movie that my friend Troy, recommended. I checked it out, and it's literally about this old couple that is preparing for and going through a nuclear bomb detonation. So they're literally like prepping for the bomb, and then they're just talking about like what's going to happen when the bomb drops, and then the bomb drops, and they don't leave their house for like I don't know a week, and then ultimately it's just them slowly dying. They just slowly die, and it's really fucking dark and sad, and it's one of
Were
those
you
movies that when you're
tripping for
done watching
this?
it, you're like, why did I watch that? That was actually really fucking brutal and dark and weird. So yeah, that's what I would say I watched.
Were you tripping for this one or just
I wasn't tripping. I took way too many edibles. I took like I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 gummies, and I'm just watching it. I'm like, is there any positive moments at all in this movie? And the answer is no.
no?
It's just an
There's not.
English, it's just an old English couple dying from a bomb in the fallout of it.
So is it Japan or it's still like in England if England got hit by a bomb? It's like a
It's in
hypothetical.
England, and it's like Liverpool area, if I were to guess. And yeah, it's just them preparing. They're like in a rural countryside too, and
Yeah.
they get hit with the bomb, and then yeah, his wife is like slowly dying and like getting pneumonia and shit from the nuclear fallout, and he's like, "Oh no, we'll be okay. The medics are coming." And then they just die.
The medics were evaporated. Sorry.
Yeah, everybody was. Yeah, it was a
It's like
movie that I'm like, I don't even know if I should mention this on the show. People are gonna think I'm like down, uh, really low, but no, I'm not. I just tend to find these movies from time to time that are
it
just
was a recommendation. No one told me what it was.
recommendation. I like animated movies too, and this is an animated movie. Yeah, I don't know. Bear with caution. I mean, it's a good movie. Don't get me wrong. It's just a movie. Maybe I don't know. Have happier drugs with, I guess.
Yeah,
Drink with
that's
it.
an
I don't know.
interesting choice. Definitely sounds like a Troy recommendation.
Yeah. How about you? What have you watched?
Um, I watched another animated movie this week, kind of an old classic, kind of the trophy horse girl movie. But
Oh
I
boy.
showed my girlfriend Spirit for the first time this weekend.
Okay.
Never seen it, but I hadn't watched it in a while. It's a movie I would watch a couple times a year when I was younger, and it's one of those movies. It's kind of like funny where it's narration, and most of the movie is a tacky music video, but it kind of just like has a lot of heart and charm to it. And the main horse I didn't know, but is narrated by Matt Damon.
Uh,
Didn't
oh,
know
there we
that. It
go.
was one of those movies where you go back and you watch it. It was like we at the same movie when we watched Over the Hedge again, like as an adult going back to it, and you realize the main character is played by Bruce Willis. It's like, what? And then the main
Wild.
character of this movie is played by Matt Damon, who plays like he narrates Spirit, like he's the main horse for this.
Yeah, that's. I don't know if I've ever seen this, but I've definitely heard about it. So Matt Damon's the voice. Let me see the other voice actors. Yeah, this is. Oh shit, they got John Rubiano as well as a soldier.
Yeah.
Adam Paul is in here. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I've seen this, but this is
It's
yeah.
a
So would you recommend it?
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting movie. It feels like a OG Disney movie, but it's like Pixar, not it's DreamWorks kind of hitting their stride in the early 2000s. This movie came out in like 2002, 2003, and it's like all narration, but it's like they have this music in the background that's all made by like the same singer. So like part of the
Hmm.
movie is like kind of just like a musical, but it's definitely a good movie if you're like into horses, I guess.
Would you say it's better than the movie I recommended? The 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 sad, depressing, fucking yeah, really dark
Yeah.
movie.
If I had to choose, I would definitely pick to watch Spirit for 10 hours straight versus watching that other movie for 10 hours straight.
Yeah, I think
It just
I
sounds
think
like watching that movie sounds like what it's like to listen to NF, where it's just like, does it ever get, is it
is
all
there any
just sad?
happiness?
Yeah, is
Yeah,
it
maybe
all just sad?
this would be like if the worst top 5 was all the hatred and sadness and depression of those worst top 5 offenders are merged into a movie with no humor and no light, just all darkness and sad, dark, fucking the
Yeah.
world is shit mentalities.
Speaking of movies like that, did you ever watch Manchester by the Sea?
No, that's the one with Casey Affleck, right?
Yeah, where he just walks around just like it's just like this
I've
guy.
seen
It's
all the
about a
trailers
guy.
for it. That's all I saw it as.
Yeah, it's like a just following a guy with a sad life in Massachusetts.
I feel like you can just go to a town in Massachusetts and see that for free.
Literally.
Yeah, that's
I
yeah.
watched that.
Every ad I saw that was just him drinking a coffee, smoking a cigarette, and I'm like, okay, so we're just in fucking Hampton Beach now. Okay, very cool. We're in Rye. Nice.
Yeah. It's like that Boston accents. It's like watch this shot of him shoveling snow, looking all emo as he does it. And like it was like an Oscar bait movie too. I remember the Oscars that year were all over it. And I watched the
Yeah.
movie in theater, and it does have like one of those weird. It is one of those weird movie that's kind of like attractive to watch, where like I kind of like enjoyed it, but I've never had the desire to go back to it.
Hmm. So it's good, like cinematography wise.
I think it's an interesting watch, just to kind of think about what you watched. It kind of does make you think about some things. It
That's
makes
good.
you not want to live a middle class life. That's for sure.
Okay, that's interesting.
This is the movie you show your kids, like, this is what happens if you grow up and be blue collar.
Yeah. Well, is it one of those movies that if we're um, out of that area and people who are not from that area ask you if you know Casey Affleck, is it one of those movies where you're like, oh yes, this guy's from New England, he knows this movie?
Yeah, they'd probably be like, oh, Manchester by the Sea. It's like that. The Town. I just
Insane.
rewatched Gone Baby Gone recently too.
That's good. That's a good movie.
Yeah,
I
that
like the
one.
twist in there. Yeah, that's a good one.
New movies. Watch Paddington 3.
There's a
That
third
was
one.
good. Yeah, he's in Peru this time. So
Oh,
he's like
adventure.
they like it's one of those weird franchises where it seems like they're just gonna make one of these like every 5 to 10 years, and they've kind of all been spread out, but they kind of take their time with them. So like they're all like good for kids movies. They're like kids movies that I don't mind, and even like the cartoons for it is like pretty good for like a kids cartoon, like to watch as an adult.
Yeah, I think I saw the first one. I don't know if I've seen the second and third one, but that's good to know. I liked the first one. I just haven't gone back to it. But
Yeah, no, just easy watches. Good date movie. Easy movie to watch with your mom. So
yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully next watch I have found something more exciting to watch that isn't dark and depressing. But nonetheless, the Brickyard will be back next week as a live stream covering all the latest news about the NBA and NFL moving forward, going over some more drafts as well. So you're not going to want to miss it. And then, last but not least, before we end the show here, message as always: stay brick.
yeah.
Yeah, this when the wind moves, when the